The laughter stopped whenever Lisa Novak walked into a room, but she could still feel it hanging in the air, like smoke. She had learned to recognize the silence that came after jokes made at her expense. The quick glances, the poorly hidden smiles. She pretended not to notice, but she always did. Commander Lisa Novak was 43 years old. Her hair had started going gray at the temples, and she didn't bother to hide it. Her uniform was clean, but worn at the edges. She commanded the supply vessel Dusty Horizon, a ship so old that most people were surprised it still flew. In the Galactic Coalition fleet, commanding a supply ship was not an honor. It was where they put officers they didn't know what else to do with. It was a dead end. Everyone knew this, and everyone knew that Lisa Novak would never rise any higher. She walked through the corridors of Central Station 7, carrying a datapad with her quarterly supply reports. Officers passed her without saluting. A group of young Veloxy cadets watched her go by, their large eyes blinking in what she had learned to recognize as amusement. One of them made a clicking sound with his mandibles. The others laughed in their strange, chittering way. Lisa kept walking. She reached the administrative office and handed her reports to a bored clerk who barely looked at her. The clerk was human, fresh out of the academy, maybe 22 years old. He had never seen Earth. He had been born on a colony world and raised in a universe where humans were just one species among many. Supply routes look clear for the next quarter, Lisa said. We might need additional fuel cells for the Outer Rim deliveries, but I've noted that in Section 4. The clerk nodded without reading the report. I'll file it, Commander. She waited, but he didn't say anything else. No questions. He just wanted her to leave so he could go back to whatever he had been doing. Lisa left. She found a quiet corner in the station's observation deck and stood by the window, looking out at the stars. Ships moved in the distance, their lights blinking against the darkness. Big ships, important ships, warships with young commanders who had bright futures ahead of them. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. A tall Drenari officer approached, his blue skin shimmering under the station lights. His name was Veth Morak, and he was one of the few officers who bothered to speak to her directly. Commander Novak, he said, I saw you come in. How are your supply runs? Fine, she said, quiet, nothing to report. Veth made a sound that might have been a sigh. I heard some of the younger officers talking about you earlier. I wanted to apologize for them. No need, Lisa said. I'm used to it. That doesn't make it right. They don't understand what you've done, what you've been through. To them, your service record is just ancient history. Lisa almost smiled. That's one way to put it. She understood why they didn't respect her. Her combat experience came from Earth's collapse wars, a series of brutal conflicts that had torn her home planet apart for nearly 15 years. She had enlisted at 19 and spent the next 2 decades fighting in places that no longer existed on any map. The Nevada exclusion zone, the ruins of Sao Paulo, the frozen hell of the Siberian front. She remembered all of it. The mud, the blood, the screaming, the impossible choices made in the dark when the supply lines failed and there was never enough medicine, never enough food, never enough ammunition. But none of that mattered to the Coalition. Those wars happened before humanity made first contact with the Veloxy explorers. They were fought with what the other species called primitive weapons. Bullets instead of plasma, tanks instead of hovercraft, soldiers dying in trenches instead of in the clean vacuum of space. To the Coalition, Earth's wars were embarrassing, a reminder that humans had once been just another violent species killing itself over patches of dirt. Now that humanity had joined civilized space, everyone preferred to forget that ugly past. And Lisa Novak was a living reminder of everything they wanted to forget. She turned back to the window. I did 6 weeks in a surrounded position during the Siberian campaign. 47 soldiers under my command. We ran out of food on day 12, ran out of real medical supplies on day 20. By the time relief came, I had lost 19 people. I carried 3 of them out myself because we didn't have enough stretchers. Veth was quiet for a long moment. I didn't know that. No one does. No one asks. The official records just say, I served during the collapse wars. They don't say what that means. And honestly, I don't want them to know. They wouldn't understand. She watched a sleek warship glide past the window. It was beautiful, all sharp angles and glowing engines. Probably commanded by some 28-year-old prodigy who had never fired a weapon at another living being. The young officers train in simulations, Veth said carefully. Very advanced simulations. They say the experience is quite realistic. Lisa didn't laugh, but she wanted to. I'm sure it is. She had tried one of those simulations once, years ago. The graphics were impressive. The tactics were complex. But when her simulated ship was destroyed, she simply respawned at the beginning of the scenario. There was no respawn in real war. When people died, they stayed dead. When you made a mistake, you lived with the consequences forever. The young officers didn't understand that. How could they? The coalition hadn't fought a real war in over 300 years. The Veloxi hegemony joined peacefully. The Drenari were integrated through diplomacy. Every conflict in living memory had been solved with negotiations and economic pressure. War had become theoretical, a game, a puzzle to be solved with the right combination of tactics and technology. Lisa knew better. She had learned the truth in blood and fire and the screams of dying friends. War was chaos. War was horror. War was the thing that broke people in ways that never fully healed. But she kept those lessons to herself. No one wanted to hear them. No one believed they would ever need them. She was just the old commander of a supply ship. The joke that wasn't funny enough to laugh at openly. The relic of humanity's shameful past. She looked at her reflection in the window. Gray hair, tired eyes, a face that had seen too much. I should get back to my ship, she said. Supply run tomorrow. Veth nodded. Take care of yourself, Commander. Lisa walked away without answering. She had been taking care of herself for a very long time. It was all she knew how to do. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that someday, somehow, all those forgotten lessons would matter again. She just didn't know how soon that day would come. Lieutenant Commander Kevin Marsh stood in the center of the tactical arena, his hands moving through holographic displays with practiced ease. Around him, the simulation played out in perfect detail. Enemy ships appeared on his sensors. Friendly vessels responded to his commands. Explosions bloomed in silent beauty as his strategy unfolded exactly as planned. Target the lead cruiser's shield generators, he said calmly. Beta wing, flank left. Gamma wing, prepare boarding pods. The officers watching from the observation gallery leaned forward. They had seen Kevin run simulations before, but his precision never stopped being impressive. At 29 years old, he had completed more combat simulations than any officer in Coalition history. His tactics were studied at the Academy. His name was spoken with respect in every briefing room. The enemy fleet crumbled under his strategy. Virtual ships exploded in cascades of light. Within 15 minutes, the simulation announced total victory with 0 friendly casualties. The lights came up. Kevin stepped out of the arena to applause. Outstanding work, Commander, said Admiral Torin, an elderly Veloxi with graying carapace. Your shield rotation technique was particularly clever. We'll be adding it to the Academy curriculum. Thank you, Admiral, Kevin said with practiced humility. He walked through the gathering crowd of admirers, accepting congratulations with a smile that had become automatic. Captain Amy Soto fell into step beside him. She was 31, an expert in theoretical fleet maneuvers, and she watched Kevin with the kind of competitive admiration that passed for friendship among ambitious officers. "That makes what, 800 perfect simulations?" she asked. 812, Kevin corrected. "But who's counting?" It was the kind of joke that only worked among people who definitely were counting. Commander Derek Liu joined them in the corridor. He was older than both of them, 35, and he had written the definitive text on shield harmonics warfare. Behind him came Lieutenant Paula Grant, the youngest of their group, at 24. Paula was a prodigy who could run 17 combat variables simultaneously in her head. These were the rising stars of the Coalition fleet, the best and brightest, the officers who would lead humanity and its allies into whatever challenges the future might hold. None of them had ever fired a weapon at another living being. "I heard the promotion board meets next week," Paula said. "They're announcing the new command assignments." Kevin nodded. Everyone knew he was getting the Celestial Blade, the fleet's newest and most advanced warship. It was the worst-kept secret in the Coalition. The ship was being built specifically for an officer of his caliber. "Try not to look too smug when they announce it," Amy teased. "I'll do my best," Kevin said. They passed a group of junior officers who stopped talking as the four approached. Kevin recognized the look on their faces. It was the same look he had probably worn 5 years ago, watching the previous generation of stars and dreaming of taking their place. The Coalition fleet was a meritocracy, and Kevin had risen through merit. Thousands of hours in the simulation chambers, hundreds of tactical papers reviewed and approved, perfect scores on every evaluation. He had earned his success, and he was proud of it. They entered the officers' lounge, a comfortable space with large windows overlooking the station's main dock. Kevin ordered a drink and settled into a chair. "Did anyone see the supply ship come in this morning?" Derek asked. "That ancient freighter, the Dusty Horizon." "I saw it," Paula said. "It looked like it was held together with tape and prayers." Amy shook her head. "That's Lisa Novak's ship, right? The woman who served in Earth's primitive wars?" "Collapse wars," Kevin corrected automatically. He tried to be precise about things. "And yes, that's her." He had met Commander Novak a few times at briefings. She was quiet, forgettable, the kind of officer who blended into the background. Her service record was technically impressive in terms of length, but it was all ground combat on Earth, before humanity had joined the galactic community. "I feel sorry for her," Paula said. "Imagine being stuck commanding a supply ship at her age. No real combat experience, no tactical certifications. She probably peaked 30 years ago." Kevin sipped his drink. He didn't particularly enjoy talking about officers like Novak. It felt unkind. In the modern fleet, experience meant simulation hours and tactical publications. Novak had neither. Her old Earth combat skills were as useful as knowing how to ride a horse. "Different era," he said diplomatically. She did what she could with what she had. "Primitive weapons against other humans," Amy said. "That's not real war. That's just chaos with no strategy." Kevin didn't entirely agree with that assessment, but he didn't argue. The Coalition hadn't fought a real war in over 300 years. Everything they knew about combat came from simulations, war games, and theoretical models. And those tools had created a generation of officers who were, by every measurable standard, the most tactically sophisticated warriors in galactic history. What could an old ground soldier possibly teach them? An alert chimed across the lounge. Kevin looked up to see a news feed appearing on the main screen. The words, "Breaking, Unknown Fleet Detected," scrolled across the bottom. The room went quiet. A Coalition diplomatic ship had encountered something at the edge of known space. The footage was grainy, taken from long range before the diplomatic ship retreated. It showed dark shapes against the stars. Ships unlike anything in the Coalition database. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Unknown species, Derek muttered. That's unusual. Kevin felt a flicker of excitement despite himself. First contact scenarios were rare. The last new species to be discovered was the Mornari, almost 60 years ago, and they had turned out to be peaceful traders. Probably nothing, Amy said. Diplomats will handle it. They always do. Kevin nodded. She was right. Every conflict in modern history had been resolved through negotiation. The Coalition was too powerful, too advanced, too unified to face any real military threat. War was something that happened in simulations. He finished his drink and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, strange ships were moving toward Coalition space. He wondered what they wanted. He wondered what the diplomatic corps would offer them. He didn't wonder whether the Coalition fleet was ready for a fight. Of course they were ready. He had run thousands of simulations. He knew exactly how to defeat any enemy. The galaxy had no idea what humanity and its allies could do. Kevin smiled and ordered another drink. Whatever was coming, it would be handled. It always was. He had no way of knowing that within 3 months, everything he believed about war would be proven wrong. He had no way of knowing that the simulations had taught him nothing about real combat. He had no way of knowing that an old woman on a supply ship understood things that he couldn't imagine. But he would learn. They all would. The Keth did not send diplomats. They did not respond to communication attempts. They did not follow any of the first contact protocols that the Coalition had developed over centuries of peaceful expansion. They simply appeared at the edge of Coalition space with a fleet of black ships and began killing. Vexar Prime was a colony world of 3 million people. It had farms and schools and hospitals. It had children playing in parks and elderly couples watching sunsets from their balconies. It had everything that made a place worth living. The Keth burned it in 6 hours. Lisa Novak watched the news feeds from the bridge of the dusty horizon. Her crew stood around her in silence, staring at the images of fire and destruction. Nobody knew what to say. They're not taking prisoners, her first officer whispered. They're not even occupying the planet. They're just destroying everything. Lisa said nothing. She had seen this before. Not on this scale, not with alien attackers, but she recognized the pattern. This wasn't conquest. This was extermination. The Keth wanted nothing from the Coalition except its death. The Coalition fleet mobilized with confidence. Admiral Torin gave speeches about unity and strength. The news feeds showed warships launching from a dozen stations, their crews waving at cameras as they departed. The youngest officers smiled and gave thumbs up, excited to finally put their training to use. Kevin Marsh stood on the bridge of the Celestial Blade, the ship he had been promised for so long. He had taken command just 2 weeks before the Keth arrived. Now he was leading his vessel toward the enemy fleet gathering at Harmon's Gate, a strategic jump point that controlled access to the inner colonies. All systems optimal, his tactical officer reported. Weapon arrays charged, shields at full power. Kevin nodded. He had run this scenario in simulations dozens of times. Defend a jump point against a numerically superior force. Use shield rotation to minimize damage. Target enemy command vessels first. Maintain formation discipline. He knew exactly what to do. The Coalition fleet arrived at Harmon's Gate with 140 ships. The Keth were waiting with 200. The odds weren't ideal, but the Coalition had better technology, better training, and better tactics. Every simulation showed they could win. Admiral Torin gave the order to engage. The battle lasted 40 minutes. The Keth did not fight like the simulations predicted. They did not maintain formations. They did not target tactical priorities. They did not behave like rational actors following logical strategies. They rammed their own ships into Coalition vessels, sacrificing themselves to break through shield lines. They targeted medical ships and evacuation pods instead of warships. They retreated when they should have pressed forward, then attacked when they should have retreated. Their movements made no sense. Their tactics followed no recognizable pattern. The coalition officers froze. Their training had taught them to analyze enemy behavior, predict movements, exploit patterns. But there were no patterns. The Keth were chaos made flesh. Kevin watched his tactical displays with growing horror. The celestial blade shuddered as enemy fire struck her shields. Around him, ships he had served with for years broke apart and died. "Target their command ship," he ordered. "Concentrate fire on—" "Sir, I can't identify a command ship," his tactical officer said, his voice cracking. "They don't have a command structure we can recognize." "Then target the largest vessel." They did. It exploded satisfyingly. And then 4 more Kef ships emerged from the debris field behind it and slammed directly into the coalition cruiser next to them. Kevin stared at the screen. In every simulation, destroying an enemy flagship demoralized the fleet. In reality, the Keth didn't seem to notice or care. The celestial blade took a direct hit. Alarms screamed. The lights flickered. Hull breach on decks 7 through 12. Engineering is not responding. Shields failing. Kevin tried to think. He had run 10,000 simulations. He had studied tactics for 15 years. He knew exactly what to do in every scenario the Academy had created. But the Academy had never created a scenario like this. Another hit. The bridge shook violently. Kevin was thrown from his chair. When he looked up, the main view screen showed a Keth vessel heading directly toward them, ignoring all fire, its course aimed straight at the Celestial Blade's reactor core. "Evasive maneuvers!" he screamed. Too late. The Keth ship struck them at full speed. Kevin remembered fragments of what came next, the roar of decompression, the emergency bulkhead slamming shut, hands pulling him toward an escape pod. The face of his communications officer as she was dragged into the vacuum through a hole in the hull. He made it to the pod, somehow. He launched just as the Celestial Blade's reactor went critical. From the small window of his escape pod, Kevin watched the most advanced warship in the Coalition fleet explode into a cloud of debris. Around him, the battle continued. The Coalition fleet was dying. 67 ships destroyed. Thousands of officers dead. The greatest military force in galactic history was being slaughtered by an enemy that fought like wild animals. The Keth didn't follow rules. They didn't respect conventions. They didn't care about victory or defeat in any strategic sense. They simply wanted to destroy, and they were willing to destroy themselves to do it. Nothing in Kevin's training had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared any of them. When the retreat was finally called, only 43 Coalition ships escaped. Kevin's pod was recovered by a damaged cruiser that limped away from the battlefield with half its crew dead. He sat in the medical bay, a blanket around his shoulders, staring at nothing. The image of his communications officer's face kept appearing in his mind. Her name was Rita. She had been 24 years old. She had loved ancient Earth music and had a cat waiting for her on Central Station. Now she was dust scattered across a battlefield that had been lost before it even began. Kevin had trained for war his entire adult life. He had believed he understood it. He had been wrong. And somewhere in the chaos of the retreating fleet, someone remembered an old woman who had once survived 6 weeks in a surrounded position with no supplies and no hope. Outer Station 12 was not a strategic location. It was a refueling depot at the edge of Coalition space, home to 2,000 personnel who had never expected to see combat. The station had minimal weapons, aging shields, and no real military value. But it sat directly in the path of the advancing Keth fleet, and someone had to defend it. Lisa Novak arrived with 7 damaged ships and a supply hauler. That was all the coalition could spare. Every other vessel was either destroyed, retreating, or desperately trying to protect more important targets. The station commander, a young Drenari named Yeth Talak, met her at the docking bay. His blue skin had faded to pale gray. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Commander Novak," he said, "I don't understand. Why did they send you?" Lisa understood his confusion. She was nobody, a supply ship captain with no combat simulations on her record. But the admirals were dead or missing. The decorated officers were scattered, and she was the only commander who had responded to the distress call. "I'm what you've got," she said simply. "Show me the tactical situation." The situation was bad. 40 Keth vessels were heading toward the station. They would arrive in approximately 6 hours. Lisa's force of 7 damaged ships and 1 supply hauler had no chance of winning a conventional battle. "We should evacuate," Yeth said. "There's not enough time to get everyone to the escape ships, but we could save some." "No," Lisa said. Everyone in the command center turned to look at her. "We fight," she continued. "We hold them here as long as possible. That gives the evacuation ships at Sector 9 more time to escape." "Commander," Yeth said carefully, "the Keth have defeated our entire fleet. What can 7 damaged ships possibly do against 40 of theirs?" Lisa looked at the tactical display. She studied the approaching enemy formation. She thought about everything she had learned in decades of brutal ground warfare on a broken planet. "We're not going to fight them the way they expect," she said. "We're going to fight dirty." Over the next 4 hours, Lisa transformed Outer Station 12 into a trap. She had her crews fake reactor damage on 3 of the ships, making them appear to drift helplessly. She ordered cargo holds filled with mining explosives that had been stored at the station. She positioned her vessels in seemingly random patterns that actually created overlapping fields of fire. Most importantly, she studied what the Keth valued and how they communicated. "Their ships don't have a centralized command," she explained to her confused officers. "But they do coordinate. They use communication relays to share targeting data. Those relays are their weakness." A young lieutenant frowned. "In the simulations, we always target weapons or engines first." "Forget the simulations," Lisa said. "The simulations taught you to fight logical enemies. The Keth aren't logical. They're chaos. And the only way to beat chaos is to make them more confused than you are." The Keth arrived exactly when predicted. 40 black ships emerging from hyperspace like shadows given form. Lisa waited. The Keth began their attack, racing toward the apparently helpless station and its crippled defenders. 3 coalition ships drifted lifelessly, easy targets. Lisa waited. The Keth committed to their attack runs, focused on destroying what they thought were easy kills. "Now," Lisa said. The 3 damaged ships suddenly powered up, their weapons fully charged. At the same moment, the cargo holds opened and released clouds of mining explosives directly into the Keth formation. The explosions were massive. 8 Keth ships died in the first 30 seconds. The remaining Keth scattered, trying to regroup. But Lisa had already predicted their likely movements. Her ships were positioned to cut off their retreat vectors. "Target their communication relays," she ordered. "Nothing else matters. Blind them." Her crews obeyed. They ignored the Keth weapons and engines. They focused entirely on the small, easily overlooked relay systems that allowed the enemy ships to coordinate. It worked. Without their relays, the Keth became truly chaotic, unable to share information, unable to coordinate their attacks. They began firing on each other by accident. Their greatest strength became their greatest weakness. Lisa had learned something in the frozen trenches of Siberia that no simulation could teach. When you're surrounded and outgunned, you don't try to win. You try to survive. You make the enemy pay for every inch. You turn their aggression against them. The battle lasted 3 hours. Lisa lost 4 of her 7 ships. But when the shooting stopped, 23 Keth vessels were destroyed, and the remaining 9 were fleeing. On the bridge of the dusty horizon, Lisa stood at her console, bleeding from a shrapnel wound in her shoulder. She had refused medical attention until the battle was over. "Station, report status," she said calmly. "Station shields at 12%, Yeth replied. "We have significant damage to sections 4 through 7. But Commander, we're alive." Lisa nodded. "Begin rescue operations for any surviving crew from our destroyed ships. Then, get those evacuation transports moving." She finally allowed a medic to examine her wound. The young man's hands were shaking as he worked. "Commander," he said, I've never seen anything like that." "Neither have the Keth," Lisa replied. When reinforcement ships finally arrived 6 hours later, they found something impossible. A battered supply station, a single surviving warship, and a field of debris that had once been a Keth attack force. Among the survivors was Kevin Marsh. His escape pod had been recovered by one of the evacuation transports. He had made his way to the command center, still wearing the dirty uniform from his last battle. He stood in the doorway and watched Lisa Novak direct damage control operations. Her uniform was torn, her face was pale from blood loss. Her voice was steady, and her orders were clear. Kevin had spent his entire career learning how to fight in simulations. He had won thousands of virtual battles. He had written tactical papers and earned commendations. And this old woman, this joke of an officer whom everyone had dismissed, had just done something that every simulation said was impossible. He wanted to say something, to apologize for ever thinking she was irrelevant, to ask how she had known what to do. But Lisa didn't look at him. She was too busy. There were wounded to treat, and repairs to make, and more battles to prepare for. The war against the Keth had only just begun, and the Coalition fleet was about to learn that all their advanced training meant nothing compared to one woman who had survived hell and come back to teach others how to do the same. The war against the Keth lasted 3 years. In the beginning, there was only chaos. Coalition fleets crumbled against an enemy that refused to follow rules. Planets burned. Officers who had spent their entire careers in simulation chambers found themselves paralyzed when real death surrounded them. And in the middle of it all, Lisa Novak became something she had never expected to be. She became a teacher. It started small. After the Battle of Outer Station 12, surviving officers began seeking her out. They came to her ship, her quarters, her table in the mess hall. They asked questions that their academy training had never prepared them to answer. How do you keep fighting when half your systems are down? How do you read an enemy that doesn't follow patterns? How do you make decisions when there's no time to calculate the optimal outcome? Lisa told them the truth. You don't calculate. You don't analyze. You act. You trust your instincts. You accept that sometimes you'll be wrong, and people will die, and you have to keep going anyway. Many officers couldn't handle it. The gap between war games and real war broke them. They resigned. They transferred to ground positions. Some simply stopped functioning, frozen by the weight of decisions that could never be taken back. But others learned. Kevin Marsh was one of them. After his escape from the Celestial Blade, Kevin had expected to be reassigned to a support role. His confidence was shattered. His belief in simulation training had died alongside his crew. He felt like a fraud who had been exposed by the first real test of his abilities. Lisa found him in a supply closet on Central Station, sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. "I know what you're going through," she said quietly. Kevin looked up. His eyes were red. "How could you possibly know? You've never lost." "I lost 19 soldiers in Siberia," Lisa interrupted. "I lost 32 in Sao Paulo. I lost my best friend, my commanding officer, and my brother in the same week during the Nevada campaign." She paused. "I know what it's like to feel like you failed the people who trusted you." Kevin said nothing. Lisa sat down beside him. The difference between you and me isn't that I'm better or stronger. The difference is that I've had 20 years to learn how to carry the weight. You're just starting. I don't know if I can, Kevin whispered. You can, Lisa said, because you don't have a choice. The Keth aren't going to wait for you to feel ready. The people who need you aren't going to wait. You get up and you keep fighting, because that's what soldiers do. Kevin looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. Over the following months, Lisa trained a new generation of officers. Not in tactics or strategies, which they already knew, but in the harder lessons that only real combat could teach. She taught them to trust their instincts. She taught them to accept imperfect information. She taught them that sometimes survival was victory enough. Kevin became her most dedicated student. He followed her into battle after battle, watching how she made decisions, learning how she read chaos and found order within it. He stopped trying to apply simulation frameworks to real combat. He started thinking like a survivor. The Battle of the Crimson Rift came 18 months into the war. It was the largest engagement since Harmon's Gate, and the coalition was not expected to win. The Keth had brought 300 ships. The coalition had 200. Lisa commanded the defense force. Kevin served as her second-in-command. They'll try to break through the center, Kevin said, studying the tactical display. That's what the models predict. Forget the models, Lisa replied. What do your instincts tell you? Kevin closed his eyes. He thought about what he had learned over 18 months of real combat. The Keth were aggressive, but not stupid. They had adapted to coalition tactics. They had learned to counter Lisa's favorite tricks. They'll feint at the center, he said slowly. But the real attack will come from below. They'll sacrifice their lead ships to draw us out of position, then strike at our supply lines. Lisa smiled. It was the first time she had smiled at him. Good. Now what do we do about it? Together, they planned a defense that no simulation had ever generated. They split their forces into unexpected configurations. They positioned supply ships as decoys. They held their strongest vessels in reserve, hidden behind sensor shadows. When the Keth attacked, they found an enemy that had learned to think like them. The battle lasted 11 hours. It was brutal and ugly and nothing like the clean victories that Kevin had once won in simulations. Ships exploded. People died. Lisa took a bad hit to her left arm and refused to leave the bridge. But when it was over, the Keth were retreating. They had lost 170 ships. The coalition had lost 82. It was the first major victory of the war. Kevin stood beside Lisa as the remaining Keth vessels fled into hyperspace. He was exhausted. He was wounded. He had watched friends die and made choices that would haunt him forever. He was also, finally, a real soldier. Thank you, he said quietly, for not giving up on me. Lisa didn't look at him. She was too tired. You did the work. I just showed you the door. The war ended 6 months later. The Keth, weakened by years of fighting an enemy that had learned to match their ferocity, finally agreed to negotiate. They didn't want peace exactly, but they wanted to stop losing. The coalition declared victory. Politicians gave speeches. Medals were awarded. Parades were held on a dozen worlds. At the main ceremony, Lisa Novak stood at the back of the crowd. She was not on the podium. She was not being praised by admirals or interviewed by reporters. She was just a face in the crowd, watching the celebrations. Kevin found her there. He had received a promotion and a commendation. The news feeds were already calling him a war hero. He found that he didn't care about any of it. You should be up there, he said. None of this would have happened without you. Lisa shrugged. I did my job, that's all. It was more than that. You saved us. You taught us how to fight when everything we believed was wrong. Lisa finally looked at him. Her eyes were tired, but calm. No, Kevin. I taught you how to survive. There's a difference. She paused. 3 years ago, you asked me how I could know what you were going through. Do you understand now? Kevin thought about everything he had seen and done, the lives he had saved, the lives he hadn't. The weight of command that would never fully leave him. Yes, he said quietly. I understand. Lisa nodded. Then you'll be okay. She turned and walked away from the celebration, heading back toward the docks where her ship was waiting. There was always more work to do. Supply routes didn't run themselves. Kevin watched her go. Around him, people cheered and laughed and celebrated the end of a war they would never fully understand. They would remember the heroes and the victories. They would forget the cost. But Kevin would remember. He would remember an old woman who had been dismissed as a joke, who had carried the weight of real war alone for 20 years, and who had shared that burden so others could learn to carry it too. That was what soldiers did for each other. It was all they could do.